This morning's reading comes from the Gospel of John, the first chapter. And you may remember a couple of weeks ago that I had some text that was bold and blue for you all to read aloud. We're going to do that again today. So when you see the bold and blue text, that's for all of us to read aloud together. So John, the first chapter. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. John came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. John himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light, the true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. The Word, the true light, was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or of the will of flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him, and he cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me.' From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known." The good news, the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the story of how I was introduced to my children is a little unconventional. With most families, it starts with a birth story. This is not my family's story. For those of you who don't know, I have 3 stepsons from my husband Jason's first marriage, who I began raising when they were in elementary and middle school. And that's Grayson, who is 20, and Gavin, who's 23. Both are in the Army. And Griffin, who is 24 and lives with us while he's attending college. And it was important to us that I didn't meet the children until we were pretty sure we at least liked each other, and we're going to stick around with each other for a little while. We wanted to make sure our relationship was on solid ground. So I remember the meeting that I had with each of the children, and it was at different times in different ways. With Grayson, Jay and I had gone to see the Tomball High School production of Beauty and the Beast. And so we stopped off at the house afterwards, and we were sitting on the couch talking, and I heard pat, 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 little feet running across the hallway. And I heard pat, 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 running back. And Jay said, "Well, let me go check on him." So he went and saw, he's like, "That's Grayson, and he thinks you have pretty hair." Right? With Griffin, I was living in Bryan at the time, and so I drove from Bryan all the way down to Cypress, and I made chicken and dumplings earlier that week, and I was living by myself, so I had lots of leftovers. So I brought containers and containers and containers of chicken and dumplings. And so when I was going to pick Jay up, Griffin scurried out of the house, went to the trunk, gathered up all of these containers of chicken and dumplings, and scurried back into the house. And now that's his favorite dish that I make, his most requested item. And Gavin's one of my favorite stories, how I was introduced to him. So he had a choir performance at Dickens on the Strand, which is in Galveston, the first weekend in December. And he had on a nice little slacks and vest and cravat to be, in the time period. But it was all black except for the shirt and the little scarf. And he got hungry, and we were spending the day with him. And a gust of wind came as he was eating a funnel cake. And the plate went up, and he saved the funnel cake, but he was covered in powdered sugar. And so we had to dust him all off and get him ready to go sing. He looked great. He performed well. But that's my first memory of meeting Gavin. So John's introduction to Jesus is a little unconventional, too. John's is an unusual Christmas story where Matthew and Luke begin with the conception and the birth of Jesus. John begins with Jesus as the Word at the very beginning of creation, with God, but also part of God. We can understand a teen mom, a stable, a star, shepherds, and wise visitors of Epiphany with their sumptuous and expensive gifts. We can easily imagine these things because they captivate us. It's a little harder to imagine life, light, grace, truth, word. What does word look like? For the original listeners of John's Christmas story, this is a poetic and philosophical retelling of the relationship between Jesus and God and humanity that knits together Jewish and Greco-Roman concepts and imagery. The Greek and later Roman philosophers were really big into idealized values. So you might have think about clouds in the sky. You might have a cloud that says truth, and it is the truthiest truth that ever truthed. And beauty, and it is the most beautiful beauty that was ever beautiful. And you have light, and it was the brightest light that ever lit up anything. These are these values that are floating up here, hard for humanity to reach. And through all of our efforts, it's like firing an arrow into the clouds. We aim as best we can, but we always fall short. And we get closer and closer, but we never quite get there. What John says to the original listeners is that you don't have to keep trying to make your way to those value clouds that are truth and grace and life and light. It is the Logos, the Word, and it has already come down to meet us. This Greek Logos word is God's spoken desire that becomes reality. At the beginning of creation, it was this creative force that God spoke, and things were. And in this case, God's desire for redemption and reconciliation of humanity was spoken and became God in the flesh, Jesus Christ. And John's witness is important because the signs of the star and the shepherds and the wise visitors from the east were not enough for the world to recognize God made flesh when we encounter Jesus. John presented it in a way that they could understand. And that's great and all for ancient philosophers, but what does any of this weird Christmas story have for us today? There's been an article popping up online recently, ever since September, about languishing. Has anyone seen the article on languishing? If you haven't seen it, languishing is that stagnant, empty, restless aimlessness, the no man's land between the hopelessness of depression and the hopeful flourishing of mental and physical and emotional well-being. We're not in active crisis when we languish, but all does not feel well. Maybe for you, languishing looks like staying up watching nothing in particular on TV or on the internet late into the night. Perhaps it's feeling stuck on a project that used to bring you passion and joy. Maybe you're like me and you find yourself waking up and scrolling on your phone for an hour before you're getting out of bed, when you know there are things you need and want to do. The New York Times calls languishing the dominant mental state of 2021. The losses of the past year and the pandemic have left us feeling shocked and grieving and disoriented, seeking comfort in numbing out. And I think it's even worse in the few days after Christmas, when the wrapping paper is thrown away and the shiny newness has worn off of the gifts. Our languishing can cause the brightness of Christmas to start to dim. We can feel the darkness acutely in those lost days between the ending of December and the beginning of January, where every day feels like a Sunday, and yet we can't rest. We're full, but we're not fulfilled. However, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. I was reminded of the light that thrives and defies the darkness, watching the fireworks Friday night. Seeing my neighbors shout and cheer and celebrate and light up the night sky in the midst of our shared yet isolated languishing made me a little teary-eyed. Now, they could have been cheering because they were bidding 2021 good riddance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were celebrating the arrival of something new. God breaking into our languishing to offer us a new chance, a new opportunity. And John's testimony is important because it signifies that God is doing something new, drawing nearer to us. And at its heart, the Word become flesh is a love story and an adoption story. The star of Epiphany reminds us this Thursday, as it heralds the arrival of one through whom the stars, the light, and all other things came into being. God is eternal, but never static or unchanging or unmoved. God sees us in our languishing and draws near. God made us in God's image, and when we could no longer see God in ourselves and our neighbor, when inspiration and insight and passion and compassion and kindness and mercy were nowhere in sight, God became like us. This version of the Christmas story ends with not just the birth of one child, but the whole world being made God's children, however unconventional the meeting. And so we move into this new year and into Epiphany as heralding stars sent by God, bearing this message throughout the world. You have become children of God. You love because the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a parent's precious child, full of grace and truth. Amen.